In a Seneca village lived a boy whose father and mother died when he was only a few weeks old. The little boy was cared for by a woman who had known his parents very well. She gave him the name Peoshoa, which means orphan. The boy grew to be very healthy and very active. When he was old enough, his foster mother gave him a bow and some arrows and said, "It's time for you to learn to hunt. Tomorrow morning, go into the woods and kill all the birds you can find." Taking cobs of dry corn, the woman shelled off the kernels and parched them in the hot ashes. And the next morning, she gave the boy some of the corn for his breakfast and rolled up some in a piece of buckskin. Told him to take it with him. He would be gone all day and he would get hungry. Peoshoa started off and was very successful. At noon, he sat down and rested and ate some of the parched corn. Then he hunted till the middle of the afternoon. When he began to walk toward home, he had a very good string of birds. Next morning, Peoshoa's foster mother gave him parched corn for breakfast. While he was eating, she told him that he must do his best while hunting, for if he became a good hunter, he would always be prosperous. The boy took his bow and arrows and a little bundle of corn and went into the woods. Again, he found plenty of birds. At midday, he ate his corn and thought over what his foster mother had told him. In his mind, he said, "I'll do just as my mother tells me. Then sometime I'll be able to hunt big game." Peoshoa hunted till toward evening, then went home with a larger string of birds than he had the previous day. His foster mother thanked him and said, "Now you have begun to help me get food." Early the next morning, the boy's breakfast was ready, and as soon as he had eaten it, he took his little bundle of parched corn and started off. He went further into the woods and at night came home with a larger string of birds than he had the second day. His foster mother praised and she thanked him. Each day the boy brought home more birds than the previous day. On the 9th day he had killed so many that he brought them home on his back. His foster mother tied the birds in little bundles of 3 and 4 and distributed them amongst their neighbors. The 10th day the boy started off as usual, and as each day he had gone farther and farther for game than the preceding day. So now he went deeper into the woods than ever. About midday, the sinew that held the feathers of his arrow had loosened. Looking around for a place where he could sit down while he took the sinew off and wound it again, he saw a small opening, and near the center of the opening, a high, smooth, flat-topped, round stone. He went to the stone, sprang up on it, and sat down. He unwound the sinew and put it in his mouth to soften it. Then he arranged the arrows, and he arranged the feathers, and was about to fasten them to the arrow when a voice right near him asked, "Shall I tell you some stories?" Peoshoa looked up and expected to see a man. Not seeing anyone, he looked behind the stone and around it. Then he again began to tie the feathers to the arrow. "Shall I tell you stories?" asked the voice right there by him. The boy looked in every direction, but saw no one. Then he made up his mind to watch and find out who was trying to fool him. He stopped working and listened, and when the voice asked again, "Shall I tell you stories?" he found that it came from the stone. Then he asked, "What is that? What does it mean to tell stories?" It answered, "To tell stories is to tell what happened a long time ago. If you will give me your birds, I will tell you stories." "Well, you may have my birds." As soon as the boy promised to give the birds, the stone began to tell what happened long ago, when the world was old and the stories were told. Another one began. The boy sat with his head down and listened. Toward night, the stone said, "We will rest now, but you come again tomorrow. If anyone asks you about your birds, say that you have killed so many that they are getting scarce, and you have to go a very long way to find any birds at all." While going home, the boy killed 5 or 6 birds. When his foster mother asked why he had so few birds, he said because they were scarce, and he had to go farther and further to get him. The next morning, Peoshoa started off with his bow and arrows and a little bundle of parched corn, but he forgot to hunt for birds. He was thinking of the stories the stone had told him. When a bird lightened near him, he shot it, but he kept straight on toward the opening of the woods. When he got there, he put his birds on the stone and called out, "I've come. Here are birds. Now please tell me stories." He told story after story. Towards night it said, "Now we must rest till tomorrow." On the way home the boy looked for birds, but it was late, he only found a few. The night the foster mother told her neighbors, When Paashao first began to hunt, he had brought home a great many birds. But now he brought home only 4 or 5 after being in the woods from morning till night. She said there was something strange about it. Either he threw the birds away or he gave them to some animal, or maybe he idled time away and didn't hunt. She hired a boy to follow Paashao and to find out where he was going. The next morning, the boy took his bow and arrows and followed Paashao, keeping out of his sight and sometimes shooting a bird. Paashao killed a good many birds. Then about the middle of the forenoon, he suddenly started toward the east, running as fast as he could. The boy followed till he came to an opening in the woods and saw Paashao climb up and sit down on a large round stone. He crept near and heard talking. When he couldn't see the person to whom Paashao was talking to, he went up to the boy and asked, "What are you doing here?" "Hearing stories." "What are stories?" "Telling about things that happened long ago. Put your birds on this stone and say, 'I've come to hear stories.'" The boy did as told, and straightway the stone began. The boys listened till the sun went down, and then the stone said, "We will rest now, but please come again tomorrow." On the way home, Paashao killed 3 or 4 birds. When the woman asked the boys she sent why Paashao killed so few birds, he said, "I followed him for a while, and then I spoke to him. And after that, we hunted together. Till it was time to come home, we couldn't find any birds." The next morning, the elder boy said, "I'm going with Paashao to hunt. It's sport." The two started off together. By the middle of the forenoon, each boy had a long string of birds. They hurried to the opening, put the birds on the stone, and said, "We have come. Here are the birds. Now please tell us stories." They sat on the stone and listened to stories till late afternoon, when the stone said, "We will rest now until tomorrow." On the way home, the boys shot every bird they could find, but it was late and they didn't find many. Several days went by in this way, and the foster mother said, "These boys kill more birds than they bring home," and she hired 2 men to follow them. The next morning, when Paashao and his friend started for the woods, the 2 men followed. When the boys had a large number of birds, they stopped hunting and hurried to the opening. The men followed, and hiding behind the trees, saw them put the birds on a large round stone, and then jump up and sit there with their heads down, listening to a man's voice. Every little while say, "Let's go there and find out who's talking to the boys," said the other man to the other. They walked quickly to the stone and asked, "What are you boys doing?" The boys were startled, but Paashao said, "You must promise not to tell anybody." They promised. Then Paashao said, "Jump and sit on the stone." The men seated themselves on the stone, and the boys said, "Go on with the story. We are all listening now." The 4 sat there with their heads down, and the stone began to tell stories. When it was almost nighttime, the stone said, "Tomorrow, all the people in your village must come and listen to my stories. Tell the chief to send every man, and each man brings something to eat. You must clean the brush away, so that your people can sit on the ground near me and listen to the stories." That night, Paashao told the chief about the storytelling stone and gave him the stone's message. The chief sent a runner to give the message to each family in the village. Early the next morning, everyone in the village was ready to start. Paashao went ahead, and the crowd followed. When they came to the opening, each man put what he had brought, meat or bread, on the stone. The brush was cleared away, and everyone sat down. When all was quiet, the stone said, "Now I will tell you stories of what happened long ago. There was a world before this one. The things that I'm going to tell you, they all happened in that world. Some of you will remember every word that I say. Some of you will remember parts of the words, and some will forget everything that is being said here. I think this will be the way, but each man must do his best and do the best he can. Hereafter, you must tell these stories to one another. Now sit down and please listen." Each man bent his head and listened to every word the stone said. Once in a while, the boy said, When the sun was almost down, the stone said, "We'll rest now. Come tomorrow, and bring meat and bread." The next morning, when the people gathered around the stone, they found that the meat and bread that they had left the day before was gone. They put the food they had brought on the stone, then sat in a circle and waited. When all was quiet, the stone began. Again, it told stories till the sun was almost down. Then it came. Come tomorrow. Tomorrow I will finish the stories of what happened very long ago. Early in the morning, the people of the village gathered around the stone, and when all was quiet, the stone began to tell stories. And it told till late afternoon. Then it said, I have finished. You must keep these stories as long as the world lasts. Tell them to your children and your grandchildren, and generation after generation after generation. One person will remember them better than another. When you go to a man or a woman to ask for one of these stories, carry something to pay for it. Maybe bread or meat or corn, just whatever you have. I know all that happened in this world and before this, and I have told it to you. When you visit one another, you must tell these stories, and you must tell these things, and keep them up always. But I have finished. And so it has been. From the stone came all the knowledge of the Senecas have in the world before this. And this is the story of how stories began. Thank you for listening.